Masking in the workplace. Hi, I'm Brett the Audi Boss. On this channel, we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I have over 10 years of leadership training and experience, and I'm an autistic manager with ADHD. One of the things I've been thinking about more and more as I sit with the concept of masking and trying to figure out that push-pull between when do I unmask and when do I mask. I've been processing a lot about how I mask in the workplace, how I mask at work. I have one of those jobs that is in a corporate work environment where I have a more senior role. For the sake of my work, for the sake of the things that I need to do for my mental health, I have to mask for most of the day at work. I have to mask for a lot of situations that I find myself in. I learned pretty early on that when I was in college, I sort of found my way into more of my special interests, and I was able to unmask more in those environments. And being sort of a naive, young 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, I would unmask in ways that were not necessarily appropriate. I would find myself being more candid, more forthcoming, more transparent in the words and the language that I would use because I was really looking for my own objectives to be met or trying to get things done that I wanted to get done creatively. That didn't necessarily work when it came time to build teams and build cohesiveness and to build community so that we could all work together to get the vision met, to get the job done. The more I then grew up and had more professional jobs and sort of had good bosses and bad bosses at various jobs over the years, I quickly found a way to sort of listen and observe and learn. When I first show up to a space, anytime I'm starting a new situation, a new job, a new environment, I usually spend a lot of time heavily masking because I'm trying to assimilate in a lot of ways, trying to figure out what the dynamics are around me. Who does what job? Who does this role? Who does that role? Who do I go to for this thing or that thing? Who's the decision maker? Who's deciding what moves forward and what doesn't? Who's influential in the conversations? Now, some people might listen to that and think, oh, that's being kind of manipulative because you're trying to figure out who do you go to for what. And I would say that that's learning the room, that's learning the environment, that's learning the team, that's learning how the functionality of the group works, the workflow, the cogs in the system, and how to move things forward. You don't want to show up into those teams and in those workspaces and be sort of someone who breaks the system down. My goal oftentimes as a new employee, regardless of the position that I hold in that space, is to help continue to keep things fluid, to keep things moving. Now, the autistic side of me, look at those systems, evaluate them, and figure out how can we improve upon this. You know, I may sit there with both ADHD and autism and really observe a lot of different things that are not working as efficiently as they could, or maybe there's ways that we could cut time or we can move things faster, we get more creative, or why do we do things that way? Have we ever wondered why we do things that way? I'm a big fan of not sticking with the we've always done things that way. I'm of the camp that finds, well, we've always done it that way to be sort of a curse for creativity. It doesn't help advance things. It doesn't help move things forward. If anything, it really stalls creativity, makes people very complacent, and really slows down the ability for people to grow within their roles and for departments and teams to grow. And I have a special interest in how organizations run, in systems and all these different things, and how to make things more creative and more fluid and help people find more of their voice and feel more empowered and engaged in the workplace. I love that stuff. That's what I do. That's why I have this channel. And oftentimes, whether people want to hear from me or not on that, I will bring up suggestions or ideas or thoughts. A lot of times it starts with asking a lot of curious questions about, why do we do things that way? Why does this system work this way? Why does that work? Why does that work? And a lot of times that's there for me to figure out how the system works. How do I show up in that system and how I do those things? But then over time, as I start to get comfortable and I start to slightly unmask more so that I can be more part of the team, that's when I want to start building more collegial relationships. And so I'm going to unmask a little bit more there. There's a difference between being too vulnerable, too unmasked, and being workplace appropriate and workplace unprofessional. And that's where, as I have taken on different roles and started to move up in the leadership ladder, I have to be more careful about the words that I choose, when I show up angry, when I show up frustrated, when I show up happy, or when I show up sort of, you know, burnt out, or all these different things, because that vibe, how I walk into the room, how I show up, how I do those things, that will then ripple out and impact everybody else on the team. Now, there's a way to demonstrate and there's a way to communicate those things that I have found for my work and for what I do, to say, well, I'm having a rough day, or I'm a little frustrated by this, or, you know, I wish, you know, we were being a little bit more efficient, or, you know, all these different things. But I don't often start with those things. If I have to have tough conversations with the people on my team or with colleagues or with somebody else, a lot of times I will show up with questions first. so that we can kind of unpack what's going on. Where did this come from? What's the situation here? And then as I gather that information and I gather that data and I listen in real time, try to process a little bit about what I'm hearing. Sometimes in those situations, if I have to step away from that call or step away from that conversation so that I can go process or I can go think that through with a different colleague, take that time to do so. And then I'll come back and then have that difficult conversation, in reference, hey, based on this conversation, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm piecing together. We really need to work on this. This is what I've identified as the problem. Then again, a question, how do we work together, me, you, our team, whoever, to solve this problem? How do we fix this problem together as a team? And that way I'm not coming in hot and sort of saying, well, this is what we're going to do. This is how you're going to do it, because people don't want to engage in that way. To do all of that work, I have to stay very masked for that stuff, because I don't necessarily want to come in there and tell people what I'm really thinking, be really candid, be really honest, because that can ruin things. Can't tell you how many meetings I've shown up to that if I speak first, all creativity, all thinking, all of that stuff stops, because people in the room now feel, okay, well, he's the boss. He's said what he's going to say, and there's really no place for us to think or for us to speak or for us to be creative. Well, I don't want that. I want my people to be engaged. I want my people to be creative. I want my teams to be able to do that. I want to work with other teams and help them be creative and be engaged as well. So oftentimes I have found to sort of show up, sit quietly. That even extends to not even going to certain meetings, because if I know my team is having a meeting and they're doing all of this stuff, I need to maybe not be present, because just my presence being on that call or being in that room or being in that meeting is going to stifle their candid nature that team needs to have, because they want to be able to think out loud or process out loud or do those things before I get involved. And then I come to them after and say, okay, how did that go? Give me your feedback. Let's break it down. Let's recap that stuff. That's a really important rule that it took me a while to learn. It took me a really long time to learn that how I show up in those rooms, how I show up in those spaces matters. Because younger days, early days, before I really recognized the importance of the role that I played in certain rooms or certain calls as I grew in my leadership career, I needed to learn quickly. And thankfully, I had some really honest colleagues that would tell me, hey, look, if you speak first, if you show up to that call, if you're too candid with people, if you're too honest, if you're too direct, that's going to sort of put a cloud over things, and people aren't going to feel that they can do what they want to do or have autonomy in their role. And so as soon as I heard that, felt bad and I realized, oh my God. And then I started to pay attention to that. And I started to observe that more. I started to listen to those instincts where I might try to speak first. Now I just write those things down, or I keep those notes to myself, or I follow up after the fact more one-on-one. That's when I've sort of started to learn, well, if I'm a senior person, if I'm going to call somebody out in a meeting or in a call or something, it's going to be to give them positive reinforcement or praise or thank them for doing a job well done. It's not going to be about chastising them or calling them out of a conversation with somebody. I'm going to do that privately. I'm going to do that separately. It's not going to be done in a public space. And if I get too burnt out, or I get too tired, or I get too overworked, or I don't have enough sleep, or I haven't had something to eat, or I'm too hungry, whatever it is, that's when it starts to push my boundaries of unmasking, where I might be too candid or too sarcastic or too direct or too bold. And when I hear myself doing things like that, or I'm starting to feel those sensations inside of my body, that's when I know I need to step back, maybe take a day off, take a few days off, maybe go reflect, maybe go do absolutely nothing for a little while, go through that process of unmasking, go through some of that burnout time, do some of that unmasking work that Dr. Nuff talks about in the Autistic Burnout Workbook. Do that work so that I can get back in touch with myself and be comfortable again. So for me, it is specifically knowing how I'm masking, having an unmasking plan for before and after, either for that specific meeting, for that specific work day, for that specific work week. And I'll tell you all, my weekends, I am usually so spent and so burnt because I've got to mask all that time. And, I've not found a way to be able to unmask in the corporate workplace. I find that that's just sort of, for me, that's what I have to do. That's how I have to show up. But I do have pockets. I do have spaces. I do have colleagues. I do have people that I can sit with and be with and participate with where I can be more unmasked. But I always have to think about the corporate appropriateness, professionalism. What is workplace appropriate? Can't be too candid. I can't make too many jokes. I can't be too sarcastic. I can't I can't say anything that's inappropriate. I have a background in corporate communications as well as being a journalist. Couldn't share my opinion about things when I was a journalist for 12 years because that would have been inappropriate for the work that I was doing. I needed to stay down the middle all the time. It doesn't mean I don't show transparency or be candid. I am, but I find ways to do that in a way where I feel like I'm giving enough of myself. I'm finding the right moment. I'm finding the right time. It's a very tricky balance to figure all this out. And I'm not necessarily recommending that everybody do it the way that I do it. I just wanted to speak to the fact of how I specifically do it in those situations, in those moments. It may not necessarily be healthy. You know, my current role for about 10 or 12 years, I did it as a journalist for 10 or 12 years before that. And now I'm at this place in my life where I need to find more creative outlets to unmask. The more you do these things, the more you start to lose your identity. I used to say to my journalism students after I left journalism that being out of the newsroom allowed my humanity to grow back. On this side of diagnosis, I now know what that meant was I masked so hard I lost myself into the job, and that's not what we want. We don't want to mask so hard that we lose our likes, our interests, who we are, who our identity is. I still think that's a small part of why it took me so long to come out, but that's a whole different story. Find those pockets of time where I can unmask and be more myself and get more in touch with myself. And it's an identity journey. It's completely an identity journey. When you unmask, it's about getting in touch with yourself and your identity, what you like, what you don't like, what's yours, what's not yours. So I'm taking more time to figure out those things. I'm doing different things to get more creative exploration. A lot of this work is helping me with that. If I don't take those journeys, it builds and builds and builds and create massive amounts of burnout from me if I'm not taking that time to unmask and take care of myself. It is very much self-care because I have to mask in those environments, but I have to find pockets where I can unmask, be myself, recover, relax, and you know, my ADHD always wants to fill that time, and I don't necessarily need to always fill that time, and I need to convince ADHD that I don't need to fill all that time. I hope some of this has been helpful. This is sort of like a stream of consciousness about masking in the workplace, but I hope this is something that can help for you. I'm going to write a separate piece about my queer identity and masking in the workplace that is going to be available for subscribers on Substack. If you're interested in that, please check that out. I'm going to be expanding more content on my Substack. I'm going to be launching a new office hours on my Substack. You can subscribe for that. And I'm going to be offering different tiers on my Substack as well for different things that you can get. That's coming up. So sign up for my Substack now. There's a link in the description below so that you can find out all about that and be an early subscriber for all of that. That'll also be a part of my newsletter and all of that. It really helps to have you like and subscribe because that helps me get my message out, helps me get my channel to grow. It helps me get more message to more people. Speaking of, if you have a question that you'd like for me to cover, a topic you'd like for me to do a video about, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to Substack and let me know. Thanks for watching. Please check out some of the other videos while you're here. Thanks for watching.